Well, everybody, this is the Vanguard Podcast. I'm Zach.
I'm Gavin.
And today we're super stoked to be joined by Janos Marton, a criminal justice advocate and Democratic candidate for Manhattan District Attorney. How's it going today, Janos?
It's going great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I guess one of the places I wanted to start was actually one of the first things I came across of you in general was actually a video, YouTube recording of a talk you gave at Dartmouth College not too long ago. And I thought a great place to start would actually be you kind of spoke about your own upbringing and your own experiences coming up in Rudy Giuliani's New York. We're recording in Kansas City, and we've only we can only imagine what that would have been like. So I'm just wondering if you could start and give everybody an idea of what it was like when they were supposedly cleaning up New York, and especially as a young person in New York City at the time.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I was a teenager in the 1990s when Rudy Giuliani was mayor, and that was a period when the NYPD basically had carte blanche to, quote, clean up the streets however they saw fit. And while crime did go down, as it did in many other parts of the country, the collateral damage from that was for young Black and brown people of color especially. It meant that the police were especially aggressive in their tactics. I remember being stopped and frisked, harassed, having my contents of my bag dumped out in the ground of the subway, being arrested, all things that were not unique for again, people my age who were Black or brown. I mean, especially some of my Black classmates had it much worse. And so that was a really formative experience for me, because in other ways, I grew up a middle-class kid. I grew up with my mom, an immigrant mom, and two brothers in a rent-controlled apartment, and I had great access to education. And so, it's not like my life was especially challenging, except, that facet of it as a teenager. And I always, carried that with me. And when I started learning about how to reform the system, how to get involved in justice movements, I always had a desire to work on the criminal justice system because I had seen just how callously people can be treated in it.
Yeah, just to dive in a little further on that, you wrote this awesome Medium piece about the road to 80% decarceration, and one of the things that you observed in it was how often, politicians and political candidates can say that they get behind this idea of ending mass incarceration as this sort of opaque, vague concept, but in reality, certainly their staff or the policies that they're pushing are not necessarily, putting their money where their mouth is. The rubber never meets the road. I'm wondering if you could kind of walk our audience through the vision that you have for decarceration specifically in Manhattan.
Definitely. Well, we are 5 or 6 years into a broad national criminal justice movement that is, people talking about it in a bipartisan way, a lot of media attention around it, documentaries, books, and yet here we still have 2 million people in our jail and prison system across the United States. The numbers barely budged in years, and so obviously something that we're doing isn't working. And I think part of it is that when we use vague terms like criminal justice reform, it means different things to different people. And the system itself is something of a whack-a-mole. We change bail, sentencing is still an issue. We change sentencing, parole is still an issue. And so we need to actually just look at the whole system and say, when we end mass incarceration, that means fewer people in cages, right? How many fewer people in cages? And I've had the privilege of working for two organizations, Just Leadership USA and the ACLU, both of which had a goal of 50%. How do we get this country to a place where we have 1 million fewer people in jail and prison? Now, as it relates to Manhattan, I think we can be a little bit bolder than that. We are a supposedly liberal city with a ton of resources and a ton of ways to support people outside of jail and prison. And so I've called for cutting the Manhattan jail population by 80%. And I'm the only candidate in our race who's made a pledge like that. And to me, if you're not making a numbers-based pledge, how are we supposed to hold you accountable once you win?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's one of the things that the left needs to really kind of understand, right? It's really easy. Freaking Bill de Blasio endorsed Bernie Sanders, right? So your words are completely different. Then you had the largest uprising since the civil rights movement, people demanding justice, for a broad range of police reforms. And specifically in New York City, there was a broad uprising and he completely ignores them, continues to cut the budget all across New York City for working people. And he, obviously that we can get into the subway system. However, with the budget of the NYPD, it's untouchable, right? One of the specific things I wanted to talk to you about, and one of your longer elements of work was closing Rikers Island, a jail that's become completely notorious across the entire country. 89% of its detainees Black or Latino, which is dramatically oversampling considering the about 55% of Black or Latino people inhabiting New York City. One, I'm wondering if you could remind everybody how Rikers Island got its name, and two, why you intend to close it.
Yeah, wow, it's a terrible story in a sense. The Rikers Island is named for the Riken family, which was a prominent Dutch American family in New York. And one of their progeny, Abraham Riken, was a judge, and he was the ringleader of this group called the Kidnapping Club. Now, this was a period of time, the 1820s and 30s, where slavery was illegal in New York, but was obviously still allowed in the South. And so the Kidnapping Club would have people pick up black men on the streets of New York and bring them to Judge Riken to see if there was a bounty out for them from the South. And so Judge Riken was basically the head of a bounty hunter ring for sending black men back to the South and into slavery. And that's what Rikers Island is named after, is that family. So I think when you consider the parallels between jail and slavery, it's kind of darkly fitting. And what we discovered that when we were working on closing Rikers, because really, if you look at every step of Rikers history, it's a moral stain on our city. When it was opened as a jail in the 1930s, it was literally made out of waste from digging up the subway and from trash dumps. And within years of opening, was filled with scandal of violence and corruption. And the city, as it's wont to do, brought together a blue ribbon commission about how to fix Rikers, which they did pretty much every 20 years for the next 80. And that's why when we started the Close Rikers campaign, we said, we're not reforming Rikers, we want to close it. And we built a campaign that centered the voices of directly impacted people. That's people who have been incarcerated there or whose family members have been incarcerated there, and said, look, Rikers Island might be out of sight, out of mind for most New Yorkers, but we have thousands of people there who are legally innocent, who have not had their day in court, only there because they're too poor to pay bail. It's time to shut Rikers Island down, invest in the communities where these people came from, and give them better access to justice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, disgusting. And it's great that, yourself and several other candidates in New York City are kind of leading the charge on, closing Rikers Island and really addressing that history. Something else I was wondering your opinion on, or kind of what you'd be able to do as district attorney, is just, drug criminalization. Obviously, we've seen, cities around the country and even states like Oregon, take the step to decriminalize hard drugs. And obviously, reaching an 80% decarcerated number, with so many drug charges being the reason why people end up in jail. I was just wondering your opinion on that. And also what you'd be able to do as district attorney. Would you just, simply stop prosecuting such charges, or like what exactly would your vision be for drug related issues?
Yeah, we put out a whole drug policy platform this winter because this is an issue that's really important to me. It's one of the first things I got involved in, is trying to stop the drug war. Even as a 18-year-old who understood very little about our politics, it just seemed very obvious to me that the war on drugs was misguided, and it's tears communities apart, and it's built on a bunch of lies. I mean, for the people of my age grew up on the "This is your brain on drugs" DARE commercials. It eroded my trust in government at an early age when I learned that actually smoking marijuana doesn't destroy your brain immediately upon impact. And so I think it's time to end the war on drugs. And I think we can't do it single-handedly in Manhattan. And certainly we're behind our West Coast peers in passing laws and referenda that can get us in the right place. But there's a lot that the DA can do. So here's some of my plan. One is I'm going to stop criminally prosecuting drug possession of any kind. And then when it comes to larger volumes, we're going to look at two different things. One is a person struggling from a public health perspective, from an addiction perspective? Can we get them into a program where they can stop their substance use dependency if that's what they want? And if that's, if that's a goal, then we can help them achieve that in a way that is not punitive. And then if somebody is selling just for economic reasons, which is certainly the case with certain people that I knew growing up, like they were not addicted to drugs. They maybe didn't even use them that much, but they knew it was a job and it was money that they could make in a tough economy. And for those people, we need to get them, avenues into the legal economy, especially in New York City. We're supposed to be the most entrepreneurial place in the country. Surely if somebody is out there selling drugs at a young age to make money, we can figure out how to get them a good legal job that pays the same or better.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the legality thing, or why people turn to, dealing drugs. And anyone that's worked in a, shitty, low wage, exploitative job can immediately understand why someone would turn to doing that. I mean, if you know anything about the cost of most drugs and you understand how much money those people are making in comparison to how much they would make, working at Walmart or slaving away at McDonald's or whatever. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that a lot of times, it's just the exploitative nature of the actual jobs that are out there and the low wages they're offering, the lack of benefits that, makes a lot of people turn to do something like that, which really, I guess depending on the drug you're dealing, it has varying levels of moral implications if you're dealing like heroin to high school kids. Obviously, that's not the same thing as, selling weed. But, that's an interesting approach to it for sure. One thing else I was interested in, and I read a, pretty good interview with yourself with Jacobin that you did. I recommend everyone check that out. We'll link that in the description. But the interview mentioned that the incumbent DA, Cy Vance, had been heavily criticized in past years for overly punitive policies towards minor drug crime and quality of life offenses such as bus fare evasion, while meanwhile letting powerful actors such as the Trump family and Jeffrey Epstein off the hook. And Harvey Weinstein, yeah, too. I just wanted to hear a little bit and maybe get your insight or perspective into, I don't know if it said in the article he's probably not going to be seeking re-election, so I guess not necessarily your opponent. But could you maybe just talk a little bit about Cy Vance and also just specifically how he let off the hook Epstein and Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to button up the last thing we were talking about, New York is on the cusp of potentially legalizing marijuana this year. And one of the things that I've been in conversations with a lot of activists and community leaders about is, how do we make sure that whatever version of the bill passes gives communities of color access into the legal economy, both from an entrepreneurial sense, getting licenses, and also being allowed to work in that industry, not having, regressive laws, like if you have a drug offense, you can't work in the drug industry, which will serve to discriminate against the very people who should be benefiting from these jobs. So that's just on that one. So yeah, Cy Vance, we don't know if he's running or not. He's been very coy about it for the last year. So I'm kind of, our strategy is really not that different, whether or not he runs. Obviously the politics of, getting out the vote and all that kind of stuff is complicated if he's in or not, but our message is the same, which is that Cy Vance and most of the other people who are running to replace him have a view of the criminal justice system that is harsh on low-income communities of color and lets rich and powerful people off the hook. And when you look at the kind of people who've been let off the hook by Cy Vance, he will beg to say that, well, these cases are complicated and they're hard to bring, or their defense counsel was very persuasive, which are none of the luxuries that are afforded to the low-income people of color who just flood through the courtroom every day. And so going case by case, right? I mean, I think Jeffrey Epstein was clearly seemed to have some kind of connection within the DA's office to let them go light on him. With the Trump family, it was well documented that he received a major campaign contribution from Trump's lawyer around the time that the office changed their approach. And with the case of Harvey Weinstein initially, what happened there is, been a subject of some debate whether it was corruption or cowardice. Was it corruption in that they decided not to go after him due to relationships and connections, or did they honestly just feel like it would be a hard case to bring against a prominent, important person, which, morally is maybe slightly better, but the outcome for the victim is the same. And what we've said is we're going to go after the rich and powerful. We know that the way that the criminal legal system is designed, we're not always going to win. Right? We have to be honest about that. That like everything else in politics, whether it's elections or organizing or the court of law, if you take a swing at people who are rich and powerful in this generally rigged system, you're not always going to get the W. But we have to make clear that no one's above the law, and we're certainly going to do our best to hold not only rich and powerful individuals, but powerful corporations accountable, whether it's stealing money from workers via wage theft or breaking environmental laws, or putting together crooked deals with politicians.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and obviously, absolutely necessary. One of the things that you've spoken about and made pretty central to your campaign that I'm pretty enthused about and really excited by is the fact that not only have you talked about the need to decarcerate the jails that are obviously filled to a horrifying degree, especially in a place like New York City and Manhattan. But also the way that we need to change how we police in general, and we need to change, the way that we bring justice to our communities. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about that you actually wrote about in your Medium was the case of James Barish, with a man in North Carolina who went through a restorative justice process for essentially nearly fatally wounding a young girl with an accidental gun wound. I'm wondering if you could talk about one restorative justice, and how that could be brought to Manhattan.
Yeah, so one of the failings of our current criminal legal system, besides the racism, besides the discrimination against marginalized people, is that it doesn't actually achieve a couple of core things that we might expect it to, because it doesn't actually seek accountability from people who do harm, right? It does punish them, right? If somebody's arrested and prosecuted, they do get punished and go to prison, but that's not the same as asking accountability of them, right? And number two, it doesn't really offer anything to the victim or the person who was harmed. A lot of prosecutors say, justice was achieved for the victim when someone gets sent away to prison for 10 years, but has that victim's life actually changed at all? Do they feel safer than they did the day before? So what restorative justice seeks to do is actually seek accountability for the person who committed harm and actually seek some kind of resolution for the person who was harmed, and do so in a way that removes the prison system from the equation entirely. Now, this is something that has been practiced in a lot of indigenous communities and other communities for hundreds of years, and is just starting to break its way into the American criminal legal system. We have pilot programs in certain cities and counties, but we have a lot of people who have really developed what these ideas can look like. And the notion is that if you have somebody who's harmed another person, if both parties are interested, this is really essential to it, if both parties are interested in a non-carceral resolution, there can be a supervised restorative justice process where somebody who has credibility with both people and with the community itself can sort of lead the two people through a process that includes other people to sort of get the person to understand why what they did was wrong, why it was harmful, how they'll know that they'll stop doing it. And in the process, let the person who was harmed know that they can feel safe now with respect to this person. And if that sounds complicated, just remember that a lot of harm that happens in our culture and our society is between people who know each other, whether it's people know each other well or people know each other fleetingly. But we actually don't have a ton, percentage-wise, of stranger danger, right? Like when a person is physically assaulted or sexually assaulted or cheated, it's usually somebody that they know. And restorative justice is a much better process for actually healing the harm that was caused by that kind of situation.
Yeah. I think that's 100% correct. And one thing that I wanted to get your opinion about, just while we have you, and because I feel like I'd be remiss not to, obviously last night, Brandon Bernard, was executed by, the U.S. government essentially. And I wanted to get your opinion on that. And I wanted to, kind of get your comment on how, we move from this draconian, heartless, cold, psychopathic way of inflicting punitive punishment. And that's not just in the form of the death penalty, but it's in the form of solitary confinement, which has been deemed by many psychologists world around as a form of torture. And it's something that's practiced routinely in U.S. Prisons and jails. So I think that that's 100% accurate. And how do we move towards this more humane understanding of how to, I don't want to say punish, but, keep our society safe and
hold people accountable. Yeah. Keep the public safe. Absolutely. Well, there are a couple of things to unpack there. I think the big picture takeaway, right, is that there's usually an underlying cause that is driving a person to commit harm. And we know what the answers are because every time we really dig deep into it, it comes back the same thing. We need to give people the opportunities to be healthy, thrive, and succeed. Otherwise, things are going to fall apart at the seams of society, right? Like I have a copy of the Kerner report from 1968 after the mid-60s riots. And what's startling when you read it is that almost every recommendation for what society needs, this came out 50 years ago, is the same thing we could argue for now: better healthcare, better access to mental health, better job opportunities for young people, especially young people of color, right? Safer, better housing. This isn't rocket science. This is what we actually need to do to make society safer. But what you're also asking is, I hear, how do we move towards a system of punishment that isn't so based on vengeance, ranging from solitary confinement, when we just want to throw someone in the hole and not think about them, all the way up to capital punishment, right? Where the state is literally taking a person's life. It's the most awesome power that a state has, and when it uses it. Solitary confinement is torture, and I think I've seen solitary confinement cells. I was just testifying at a hearing about legislation to ban solitary in New York earlier today. When you've seen it up close, it's so inhumane that it's hard to imagine thinking that it's okay from some kind of policy perspective. it's just totally out of line with how we should treat other human beings. And so I've taken the position that I will not prosecute anybody who's being held in solitary confinement. And hopefully the legislation that we were talking about today in New York renders that policy unnecessary. And then same thing with capital punishment. I would go further though. Of course I'm against the death penalty. I have been since I was a child, but we've come out in this campaign for a 20-year sentencing cap. And that is in line with a lot of other countries in the world where they don't believe that you can sentence somebody to die in prison and sentence somebody to prison for the rest of their lives. So they have a limit to, no matter what the crime is, how long you can be in prison. And because you brought up the state executing, Brandon, I think it's important to acknowledge how other countries think of the state's role with respect to prison. In Germany, most people, the maximum sentence you can get for any crime is 17 years. And by the second half of that sentence, even for the most serious crime, by the second half of that sentence, you're generally living in your own state apartments with access to a kitchen. You're allowed to leave for your job. And all of this is designed under the theory that because the state has taken away your liberty, it is their responsibility to make sure that you are better prepared to enter society.
Rehabilitate, basically.
Yeah. But they feel that ownership, which is the opposite of what we have in our system, where we basically dehumanize people for the entirety of their prison sentence, then spit them out and say, don't mess up or you'll be back here again. So that's the kind of approach that I think we need to be bringing to the justice system throughout the country.
Yeah, I think that's super innovative, and everything you've said at this interview so far has just been exactly the vision that I would definitely want to hear from my city's district attorney, certainly. So thank you for bringing those issues to the table and speaking about them in that way, because there's so few people seeking elected office that are speaking in such a brave and courageous and accurate way, frankly. My last question for you is that here on the Vanguard, we've talked to a lot of candidates in New York recently. We talked to Carlos Menchaca, who's running for mayor. We talked to Tiffany Caban, who's running for city council in Queens. Several others, DSA endorsed candidates like Zohran Mandami. But I believe that you're actually the first one we've talked to that's from, and I know you're not endorsed by the DSA yet necessarily. I think they're not endorsing in this race or something like that. But you're the first, progressive or socialist or whatever you want to call it, leaning candidate that we talked to, I believe, from Manhattan. And I'm not a New Yorker. But it's kind of the vibe I get that Manhattan is a little bit more ritzy, a little bit less working class maybe. So what's your strategy to win on this bold progressive platform? And are you maybe hoping to reach, non-voters or traditional non-voters, people in more low-income communities in Manhattan that are traditionally more ignored by politicians?
Oh, definitely. I mean, well, one thing is we should acknowledge that there are definitely some strong working class neighborhoods left in Manhattan, from Washington Heights to East Harlem to the Lower East Side, even pockets of Hell's Kitchen where I live. But you're right, it is a very affluent borough. I'll also say that parts of the Upper West Side where I grew up are affluent, but also extremely liberal. They're some of the most left-wing districts in the city. And the real question, the rubber is going to meet the road in this race with are affluent liberals willing to take the next step and say we want to transform the justice system? I think that's we don't know the answer to that yet. I'm hoping the answer is yes, but it really will be a pivotal question in this race. I think that we have an obligation in Manhattan in particular to imagine a justice system that doesn't rely on jail and prison, because we have the resources to do things a different way. Manhattan DA's office has the biggest budget of any of the 5 DA offices. There are more nonprofits in Manhattan than any other borough, universities, hospitals. So when you talk about, what can we do instead of prison, we have more tools at our disposal on the island of Manhattan than even other parts of New York City do. So I think I'm appealing to Manhattanites' sense of leadership, and we can lead not only the city but the country in how a justice system should look.
Yeah, we are 100% behind you, Janos. Just to wrap this up, where can people go to support you in your campaign and find out more about what you're about?
Sure. Well, they can go to my website, janosforda.com, JANOSFORDA.com, and they can look at volunteering or reading our policies or donating. But we are a grassroots campaign, so anybody who reaches out, will have one of our organizers get in touch with you and keep building.
Awesome. And you'll find all that information in the description box below, along with a link to Janos's awesome Medium page where you can read all about his policies in detail. Janos, thank you so much. And we look forward to speaking with you some more.
Thank you. It was great. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
for leading the way, Janos. Have a good one.